Hey, how's it going, everybody? Shane here with Northern Kentucky Catfish. Today I'm going to show you how to make your own do-it-yourself LED lights for your bobber or fishing pole.
Okay,
let's get
people,
into it.
For this do-it-yourself LED light for your bobber or your pole, these are the items that I use to make mine. You can make them a couple different ways, but for this particular one, I think these are the best. And it's really inexpensive to make, inexpensive to buy. Heck, even some of the stuff you might just have laying around the house. So let's get right into it. So what you need is a soldering iron, some soldering wire, some shrink wrap. You can buy at your local automotive place for wires and such. A Cr2032 battery coin holder. A Cr2032 3-volt battery. For this particular one, these are 5mm LED diodes. Just some standard silicone and some airline tubing. Alright, people, so the first thing you want to do is take your coin holder. Now these particular ones are a 3-prong, and I don't know if you can see that or not, but this side over here towards this top where my finger is a minus, and on here has the plus. If you notice on the plus side, you can see the 2 prongs at top. The minus has the single. Now these LEDs that I'm using are 2-prong. So never messed around with LEDs. The 2-prong, typically the longer of the two are going to be the positive. The shorter is going to be the negative. But you can always test them by taking your battery, putting this on the positive side. As you can see, the LED is working. So you can always test it before you do this. So what I like to do is put a little soldering on these prongs. And since this is only a 2-prong deal, you only need soldering on the 2 prongs that you plan on using. And it doesn't have to be a lot. We just need some on there to help it once we go to attach our LEDs. And again, I'm not the best solderer, but it's not pretty. Most of this is going to be covered up anyway when you shrink wrap it. So a little something like that. Again, I'm not the best, but as long as these aren't touching the negative and stuff like that, you're good. And you can always go back in with your soldering iron and you can clean it up if that doesn't suit your taste. But again, it doesn't have to be pretty. Most of this, like I said, it's going to be covered up anyway. So we're going to add some soldering on, again, both the positive and the negative. I might add a little more on this one. Just to make sure we've got enough so we can attach the LEDs. So again, not pretty, but we just need enough on there to make the connection. Actually, I'm going to go back in and add a little more on this because I'm not liking it. Just need to add a little more. So once you've got that soldered, next thing you want to do is, again, make sure you know which one is your positive, which one is your negative. And on here, you want to make sure you've got your negative and your positive identified before you solder these on. Again, using solder, if you were to solder on the wrong
end of your LED to the wrong prong, it's simple. Put the soldering on, heat it back up, pull it back off. Then fix your your attachment. So we're gonna take, and you can bend these LEDs. They're not gonna hurt. Just you want to be kind of delicate. So I'm going first with the positive side. So what we'll do is take our soldering iron and our positive end. We're going to heat this up and just make a quick connection. It's kind of hard to do with one hand. So I'm going to try to clean this up to make this where it's going to be a better connection. Again, hard to do with one hand. So not the best, but again, once I get this kind of on here, again, I can always clean it up. I can add a little bit more solder, but again, just instructional purposes. So now we want to go on the negative end. So I'm going to bend this kind of in place. It might be easier to do, just add an extra little bit of solder on the gun beforehand. That way I can probably just drop it on here. That way I can clean it up as I go. So we'll add some here. That looks pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing for the top side over here. That way I can just drop a little solder on that one, the first connection. So again, doesn't have to be the greatest, doesn't have to be the cleanest, as long as you got both sides soldered on and they're not touching, you should be in business. And what I normally try to do is I try to get my LED moved over towards the middle. So again, these are pretty flexible. You can kind of move them into shape. Just where this is kind of in the middle. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I like to just kind of get it towards that middle part. So the next thing I like to do is put this shrink wrap on. Now basically the shrink wrap, it's going to go over your LED and come to about there. Kind of the squared off end here, it's going to be a little past that. Now what this does is, once we heat shrink it down, it's going to kind of make it watertight. Your LEDs will last a lot longer, and it just seems like it's a better fit when you put your shrink wrap on this way. Then it's basically just sliding some of your airline tubing over your LED to kind of finish the product. So we've got our wire shrink wrap here. Now these are a little smaller in diameter than what I need to go over this, which is typically not a problem. But this is all I got right now. So typically these are pretty forgiving. Again, they're shrink wrap, so you can always use a pair of scissors, slide it on, and just kind of work it. just to get it stretched out enough, but you don't want to overstress it because it'll break. But again, this is all I got. Typically I go a little bit bigger, but this works in a pinch. So I'm kind of just lining it up here. I want to take off a little bit on it. So we'll cut off a little excess. Again, you want to kind of let it sit down on that square part. So what we'll do is I typically take a little bit of silicone. Put a little silicone on my finger here. Up around the top, I'll just put a little bit of silicone all the way around this squared edge. So once you shrink wrap it down on top of here, this will help keep out any excess water, and it'll make your lights last a little bit longer. So now we'll take this, and we're going to slide it down over top of the light like so. And then I kind of pinch on the longer sides just to kind of make it get in there good on that silicone we just laid down. So it'll look like that. Now what we need to do is get a little bit of our tubing and apply our light. And the brake tubing that I normally get is a little smaller. Typically I can use the 2mm LED diodes, but they do have bigger airline tubing. You don't need much. So what I like to do is just kind of eyeball it from the light. It's going to sit down about here, and we cut off maybe an inch. A little longer. You can make it as long as you want, really, but it's based on the strength of the LED. Stronger the LED, the longer you can make the tube, farther the light's going to travel. So you will place your LED down inside the tubing, like so. Typically all I do is sometimes I use the solder gun just to shrink this down and get it as watertight as I can get it. You can also use a lighter. Anything really works. So now that you've got your battery coin holder soldered on to your LED, we've got some tubing going over the LED, we've got our shrink wrap over top of the connections and the light itself. We've shrink wrapped that. That should be watertight. The only other thing is the end of the tube here. I typically take a little silicone, and I'm using these smaller tubes so it's easier. And I just apply some silicone in the end, like so. Silicone in, and then I typically let this sit for 24 hours just to make sure that silicone gets hard and sets up in there. Now after you're done, you want to test your connection. So again, this is the plus side of our coin battery. Pop this in. These are really nice because the battery coin holder snaps right in. Once it's in, it's gold. It's hard to come out. But you can see this one here. This is just an RGB light. And I will put a description in the bottom of the video here on where I get these. They've got a lot of cool LED lights and they're fairly cheap. Nothing's gonna break the bank. But yeah, I use these here in northern Kentucky on my catfish poles. I use them on my bobbers. I use them at night on the ends of my poles just so I can see. There's a lot of different options you could use these for, and they are really bright. So yeah, like I said, very inexpensive to make. Not a whole lot of effort goes into make them. Again, they don't have to be the best looking, but they do work. And with a single battery, these will last probably a good 100 hours, if not more. Depends on, again, how much you fish and stuff like that. But there you go. If you've ever wanted a cheaper way of lighting up your bobbers, lighting up your poles at night, here's a pretty easy option for you. I hope this helps you, and stay tuned.